The addition of the new Stiletto combat drive completely transformed the combat effectiveness of the Dark Zephyr. As a short-ranged mech that needed to be within tossing distance of its target in order to make meaningful contributions to an ongoing battle, speed had always been its greatest strength and limitation. On one hand, it was by far the fastest mech in the Larkinson army. On the other hand, other expert mechs such as the Amaranto and the Promethea could easily deal more damage to distant targets without moving from their places. Venerable Tusa had always been afraid of losing relevance on the battlefield. The rising trends of the Red Ocean posed a grave threat to him, as light mechs were not as suited to fight against large enemies as other machines. The new customized combat drive solved most of his concerns. As long as the Dark Zephyr mounted this extravagantly expensive module onto its back, it could activate it at any time, allowing the expert mech to warp the surrounding space and effectively speed up its flight. There were only two major flaws to the Stiletto combat drive. The first major flaw was that it was a fairly vulnerable component. Tusa needed to pay close attention to incoming attacks. None should ever be allowed to strike the rear of the Dark Zephyr without any mitigation. In order to help the Dark Zephyr protect this sensitive and valuable module, Vess and Gloriana had worked hard to integrate a compact emergency shield generator inside the frame. It was not easy to stuff such a component inside the chassis of a small and cramped light mech, but they somehow managed to succeed by replacing many other components with miniaturized alternatives. By default, the small and fairly weak shield generator was tasked with serving as an additional layer of defense for the Stiletto drive. Since the combat drive integrated 70 grams of face water, the Larkinson clan would have to pay Morton Tech almost double this amount in order to obtain a new Stiletto drive. Vess had tried his best to negotiate a more favorable deal with the high-tech development company, but he had failed to make much progress. There weren't that many companies out there that were qualified to develop minidrives, and there were even less of them that were based in Davut. All of these companies spent face water like water, so none of them were eager to compete against each other based on price. The result was that Vess and the Larkinson clan would have to pay the same amount of face water no matter which company he approached. Settling for going into bed with Morton Tech was a helpless decision on his part. Rather than go for a company that offered slightly more attractive conditions but was based in a completely different zone, Vess might as well partner up with a local company that he could at least pay a visit to if anything went wrong with the Stiletto drive. Vess had made it abundantly clear to Venerable Tusa that he should never put the Stiletto drive at risk. If it somehow broke to the point where the Larkinsons couldn't salvage the pieces, then they needed to pay 135 grams of face water to Morton Tech in order to supply a replacement. Though the clan's reserves of face water was still fairly abundant at this point, Vess did not want to squander this strategic material too quickly. Let's see how much better he has become now that he has been able to practice with his upgraded mech for a longer time, Vess muttered as he brought his mind back to the present. He concentrated his mind in order to get in touch with Vulcan. His incarnation effectively functioned as the server of the mental simulation training system, so Vess could conveniently access it at any place and time. He quickly sought out the scenario that Tusa and the Dark Zephyr were engaged in and dove in to spectate the ongoing battle. Explosions immediately overwhelmed Vess' senses as Tusa and a portion of the Larkinson army fought against a powerful alien fleet. Although the enemy force did not field any starfighters that could dogfight against human mechs, the formidable array of weapon systems were more than enough to swat out one Larkinson mech after another. The threat posed by these warships was incredible. The dense web of firepower thrown out by these warships easily intercepted every mech that attempted to push forward. Without a sufficient quantity of ranged solutions of their own, the Larkinson mechs were unable to take down the enemy warships fast enough. The alien vessels were simply too well protected. However, even as the beleaguered ranks of Larkinson melee Mechs tried and failed to get closer, a single expert Mech managed to bridge the gap. The Dark Zephyr had quickly and speedily managed to cross the void between the two fleets in a remarkably short amount of time. It had even done so while circling around instead of taking the shortest possible route. While it would have been faster if the expert light skirmisher went straight from point A to point B, it would have been too easy for the enemy warships to bombard the speedy machine with accurate fire. By circling around and approaching the alien fleet at a different angle, it became a lot harder to land a blow on the Dark Zephyr. This was especially the case when it had activated its signature untouchable resonance ability. The mass of kinetic rounds fired by the enemy's abundant cannon batteries occasionally struck the apparent form of the Dark Zephyr, only for them to pass by harmlessly as it turned out that they hit a mirage. It took over a minute of futile effort for the alien commanders to figure out that the real Dark Zephyr was hiding in the vicinity. After adjusting their targeting strategy and firing solutions, the alien fleet finally managed to land real blows onto the Dark Zephyr. Unfortunately for them, the human expert Mech had already completed over half of its journey at this time. This was absolutely remarkable, because it would have been forced to cross a much longer distance in the past. The reason for all of this progress was the active stiletto drive equipped by the Dark Zephyr. Venerable Tusa made sure that he always kept up a resonance shield around his machine. He also oriented the Dark Zephyr so that the alien warships received the least amount of opportunities to strike at its rear. Unfortunately, the heavy blows from the enemy warships seriously depleted the resonance shield of the Dark Zephyr. Even if most of the warship cannons tasked with intercepting the lone expert Mech missed their mark, a single hit was enough to put a mean dent onto an armored starship. The Dark Zephyr couldn't afford to withstand all of this firepower for too long. Venerable Tusa had already accounted for this, though. At the start of this run, his Dark Zephyr traversed the battlefield 10 times faster than normal, but that was hardly the limit. One of the general rules of any form of warp drive was that the longer it was running, the more it was able to ramp up its warp effect. The Dark Zephyr was only able to speed up 10 times at shorter distances, but now that its stiletto drive had taken up the time to ramp up, its current amplification had surpassed 30 times. What did this mean? It only had to remain in travel for less than a third of the time in order to reach the enemy fleet. The simulated battle, indeed, proceeded in this fashion. Though the Dark Zephyr continued to slam into one shell after another despite Tusa's best attempts to evade them all, it had managed to arrive next to the nearest enemy warship at record time. This was an extremely serious problem to the enemy fleet. The closest warship couldn't even orient most of its gun turrets at the expert Mech. The ones that were further ahead did not dare to fire their heaviest armaments because they would do far more damage to their own side. This left Venerable Tusa free to act as he wished. The expert Mech did not even disengage its stiletto drive at this point. Unless the alien opponents were able to disrupt the active warp field, there was no easy way to knock the Dark Zephyr out of its accelerated state. The only problem was that all of the rapid turning and other extreme maneuvers reduced the stiletto drive's amplification factor. It didn't matter, though, as the Dark Zephyr only made a single attack pass before it flew towards the next enemy warship. Even though the expert Mech had already departed its initial target, the warship subsequently fell into a crisis as 3 transphasic grenades completely blasted all 3 of her main gun turrets. Though the alien vessel was still able to stay in the fight by firing her mostly intact secondary armaments, knocking out her biggest guns provided the Larkinsons with a lot of relief. Those main cannons had been pounding the capital ships of the Larkinson clan for a while now. If they continued to do their work, then the Larkinsons were liable to lose all of their carriers before they lost their Mechs. In the next few minutes, the Dark Zephyr repeated the same trick. All of her grenade holsters were filled with insanely expensive transphasic grenades. Vess, who had been observing this scenario for a while now, winced each time Tusa threw around those transphasic grenades like candy. Don't you know how much they are valued on the open market? You're throwing away thousands of MTA credits with every toss. The price was worth it, though. The grenades were extraordinarily potent. Much of their destructive potential bypassed many layers of thick hull plating and easily demolished the vulnerable internal components that made the gun turrets work. Even if the gun turrets were clad with transphasic armor plating that could partially resist this effect, the grenades still would have done a lot of damage since they contained an extravagant mix of explosive materials. Soon enough, the Dark Zephyr managed to defang 6 enemy warships in quick succession. Though it was still being fired upon by lots of secondary gun batteries, the Dark Zephyr cleverly utilized the enemy hulls as cover, thereby frustrating most attempts at taking it down. By now, it only had 2 transphasic grenades left. The Dark Zephyr rapidly flew towards an undamaged warship, but did not choose to take down any of her main cannons. The expert light skirmisher instead tossed the grenade towards the side of the hull. Soon, a powerful blast opened up a hole which the Dark Zephyr eagerly dove in. This time, it drew out its unending alloy daggers and began to carve deeper through the less sturdy internal structural bulkheads. If the Dark Zephyr had to breach the interior of the enemy warship with its daggers, then it would have probably taken at least a minute to carve a large enough hole. However, the transphasic grenade allowed it to bypass all of this work and save precious time. Most starships were built like eggs. Their toughest part was their exterior. As long as the shell had been breached, it was much easier to mess up the insides. The Dark Zephyr clearly experienced this as its resonance-empowered daggers, which were ordinarily lackluster against large targets, easily tore into the warship, cutting apart everything that looked important until the entire vessel lost power. Venerable Tusa soon brought his expert Mech back out and jumped towards another nearby warship and tossed the final transphasic grenade in order to repeat the same routine. Vess steadily watched as Tusa single-handedly tilted a major battle in the favor of the Larkinson clan through his own efforts. The training scenario wasn't so much of a challenge, as it was just the latest attempt of Tusa to indulge in the powerful new upgrades of his revised expert Mech. When the Dark Zephyr deployed onto the battlefield in its most powerful loadout, its threat towards enemy warships was not that much inferior to the Mars when it was bombarding a hostile fleet from a distance. When the battle scenario ended, Vess transmitted a command that forcefully pulled Venerable Tusa and the Dark Zephyr out of the MSDS. The reason why Vess visited the underground hangar bay in the first place was because he wanted to have a good talk with Tusa. The expert pilot noticed what had happened and quickly powered down his expert Mech. "Hey, Vess, have you come to check out how we're faring after the latest upgrades?" "That and more, Tusa. First off, how are you doing in your personal life? Has becoming a father changed you in any way?" A strained but loving expression appeared on his face. "Fatherhood can really change a man. I'm sure you know what I mean. I am not used to living my life while knowing that I'm responsible for a bunch of cute and needy little brats. I feel guilty each time I start my shifts when my kids are demanding attention. It doesn't help that my wife Rania is even busier than considering that she needs to run an entire research institution." As far as prominent couples went, Tusa and Rania did not immediately come to mind. However, the pairing between the sole expert light Mech pilot and a director of the second-largest research and business operation of the Larkinson already elevated the pairing to the ranks of nobility in the clan. Their children were bound to become exceptional due to all of the opportunities their wealthy and powerful parents were able to provide. As much as Vess wanted to keep the Larkinson clan as egalitarian as possible, situations like these were unavoidable over time. The higher-ranking clansmen possessed a lot more expertise and also earned higher salaries and benefits. They could pass on much of their superiority to their offspring. Vess was guilty of the same behavior. It was unthinkable for him to raise Aurelia, Andrast, and Marvain as if they were ordinary clansmen. After chatting about the woes of parenting for a while, Vess addressed a more serious topic. I'm glad to see that you have taken well to the Dark Zephyr version 2.0, but I can't help but see that you have spent an awful lot of time playing with the new transphasic high-explosive grenades in the MSDS. Is there anything wrong with that? Tusa asked as he crossed his arms. I think I have reminded you over a dozen times how expensive they are. We can't even build them in-house, you know. We have to order a new batch of them at Morton Tech. It will be rather difficult to replenish our stock when our fleet is in the middle of the Trailblazer expedition. Then our clan should stockpile more transphasic grenades. Problem solved. Look, would you rather lose a kilogram of face water or an entire capital ship? Vess would lose the former any day. A capital ship was too precious to the clan, especially given the enduring shortage of shipyard capacity and the necessity to maintain as much strength as possible in the new frontier. I'll see what I can do on short notice, but it won't be long before we formally launch the Trailblazer expedition. There are only so many transphasic grenades that we can obtain. You will have to learn to be more frugal and make more use of the other grenade types that we have stocked. It's much easier for us to replenish our stores of conventional high-explosive grenades. There are also a couple of other useful grenade types that are useful in certain scenarios. Think of EMP grenades and particle cloud grenades. I'm already familiar with those grenades. They're easy to figure out, and I've already mastered their use in my previous practice sessions. These transphasic grenades are much harder to use. They're powerful, I'll give you that, but they don't always work the same against different targets. It takes repeated practice to understand how to best put their power to use against different materials, different ship constructions, different alien defensive solutions, and so on. You don't want me to toss a transphasic grenade against a weird alien starship, only for it to get blocked, because I did not know that this would happen, right? Vess grimaced. I'll give you that, but don't let the ease of how many transphasic grenades you can toss around in the MSDS give you the impression that you can do the same in reality. I will personally decide how many transphasic grenades your Mech comes equipped with per deployment. If the enemies are not threatening enough in my judgment, then you will just have to make do with the more regular grenade types. Do you understand? Crystal clear. Even if you don't have access to the transphasic grenades, you're still a lot better off than before. You used to be frustrated all the time because you only had your daggers to rely upon to deal damage. Now, you can enter into battle with a formidable amount of explosives that can deal massive damage against larger groups of particularly tough opponents. Turning your expert Mech into a grenadier has completely transformed your role on the battlefield, especially when we have paired your Dark Zephyr up with the stiletto drive. Tusa smiled in return. I suppose that I've become too spoiled as of late. I am truly grateful that you have addressed all of my feedback and adapted my expert light skirmisher to the battlefields of today. It's quite amazing how the addition of just 2 systems completely elevates my role. I am looking a lot more forward to putting all of my new possibilities to good use against our future enemies. It pleased Vess to hear this. The Dark Zephyr was his first true expert Mech design, and one that would always have a special place in his heart. Though Venerable Tusa had the privilege of being the first Larkinson expert pilot to obtain an expert Mech, the subsequent machines that Vess had developed over the years heavily outclassed the Dark Zephyr with each subsequent edition. Newer tech, higher design budgets, better skills, and more extravagant materials all caused the Dark Zephyr to turn into the forgotten child of the class. It didn't help that the Dark Zephyr was far short of reaching masterwork quality. Gloriana couldn't even give it hope of evolving into one because she needed to conduct a more thorough overhaul in order to turn it into a god body. Given all of these disadvantages, Vess had done his best to shore up the value of the Dark Zephyr. Taking the additional steps of acquiring an expensive batch of transphasic grenades did much to dispel Venerable Tusa's dissatisfaction at his lack of power in battle. Ves briefly wondered whether it was even wise for him to give Tusa another gift. He had already pampered his cousin a lot. From a management perspective, it might be best to keep any subsequent gifts in reserve and wait until Tusa needed to be placated again. There were more factors at play, though. Ves had to take his safety and the safety of the clan into account as well. Granting Tusa a powerful enlightenment fruit would power him up as quickly as possible, giving him plenty of time to master his new skills and abilities. It would be too late to hand over an enlightenment fruit to Tusa on the eve of battle. Ves decided to go through with this decision. He gestured for Tusa to follow him out of the hangar bay and move to the specialized isolation chamber that was built in the middle of the underground complex. Once they reached the secure space, Ves made sure to close it up and deploy all of the jamming and other interference solutions. Once he was satisfied, he raised his hand and conjured up a special enlightenment fruit. The dark and shadowy aura surrounding the fruit instantly caused the expert pilot to raise his vigilance. "What is that, Ves? Is that one of the strange fruits grown by the Tea Institute that Rania has mentioned to me lately?" "It's not from the Tea Institute." Ves shook his head. "It's something different. This fruit is a gift. I don't dare to explain what it is out loud, but I can guarantee you that it will be to your benefit if you eat it. This fruit will allow you to refine your combat approach and fight in a more specialized way." Seeing that Ves was eager for Tusa to ingest the fruit, the expert pilot trusted his intuition that said that the patriarch did not mean to do any harm. The fruit still made him feel uneasy, though. The expert pilot felt that more might change than he would like. "What if I don't like what the fruit has to offer?" "It is up to you whether you decide to accept everything. All I can say is that you should do your best to stay true to your heart. Absorb what you think is useful and helpful to you, but maintain your skepticism against elements that do not sound so great to you. This fruit will undoubtedly impart a lot of material to you in a short amount of time, so you need to act quick and put your trust in yourself." This answer hardly reassured the expert pilot. "Can I think about it, Ves? I was thinking about saving it up for Andrast when she grows old enough to handle the fruit. The fact that I have considered this option should tell you how much value this fruit possesses. It can grant someone a fantastic opportunity to become stronger, both inside and outside of the cockpit. I have extended a great privilege to you by reserving it for your use. Is that enough?" Venerable Tusa decided to take the fruit at this point. He hesitated for only a brief moment before he munched on it. It only took a few quick bites for him to swallow the surprisingly light fruit. Soon, a strange torrent of shadowy energy erupted from his stomach and attempted to go straight into his mind and spirit. His powerful force of will and formidable mental defenses stopped the fruit from doing its work. "Let it through, Tusa. It's mostly information that you're getting." When Tusa carefully lowered his mental defenses, he understood what Ves meant by those words. His eyes widened as he immediately understood what he was getting. All kinds of information and knowledge about a remarkable weapon style and philosophy started to pour into his mind. The Shadow Dance dagger-style fruit did not just impart knowledge, though. As a fruit that existed to prime an individual towards an extraordinary fighting style, it also injected Tusa with a quantity of shadow energy that attempted to merge with the expert pilot's spirit. Ves paid careful attention to this process. He had already figured out that the Shadow Dance style could only fully be utilized by a practitioner that possessed a large affinity with the element of shadow. Even a less intensive use of this special fighting style also demanded at least a bit of familiarity with shadow energy. Tusa's original domain consisted of evasion and freedom of movement. Shadow did not play an obvious role in his fighting style and his philosophy towards life. He understood that he had to make a difficult decision. Should he embrace the power of shadows and make the best use of the fruit that he ingested, or should he preserve everything that made up his current self? He closed his eyes and made his choice. In the end, Tusa chose to integrate a bit of shadow energy, but reject the remainder. This was a compromise decision, where he only accepted a minimal amount of influence from the shadow element. This was just enough for him to understand the essence of the shadow dance style, but not enough for his personality to change overnight. It was a pity that his reluctant embrace of shadow would prevent him from using the shadow dance style to its full potential. Not only would every extraordinary move be lacking in power, the expert pilot would also be unable to pull off the most advanced and intensive killer moves of this new fighting style. Apparently, that was fine with Venerable Tusa. Just like many other expert pilots, he had already made a lot of progress into building his own fighting style and approach. He was confident that he could morph the shadow dance style into a version that embodied his own strengths. "How powerful," Tusa uttered with amazement. "I finally understand why those sword maidens and heaven sworders are so obsessed with deep and profound swordsmanship. I can potentially defeat opponents that are twice or thrice as myself if I practice this new style." Ves smiled as he concluded that Tusa successfully absorbed the valuable shadow dance dagger-style fruit. As the most valuable prize that he obtained from a golden lottery ticket, the fruit extensively set Venerable Tusa up to quickly utilize and master the new fighting style. The expert pilot was so taken in by all of the new approach and techniques that he drew out his personal daggers and began to dance in the middle of the secure chamber. Ves quickly took a few steps back as he saw that Tusa reenacted the new moves as if he was being possessed. The charm of the shadow dance style centered around how it was able to combine multiple different concepts into a cohesive fighting style. As Tusa rapidly spun around while striking his daggers at multiple different angles, he managed to strike quickly while also being able to keep his body elusive and on the move. Attacking Tusa was quite difficult when he was moving around a lot. His variable and disorienting movements made it a lot harder to predict his trajectory, while his quick dagger attacks constantly approached from slightly different angles. While it was easy for a practitioner to look like he was flailing around, Tusa managed to make his varied and intensive movement look both harmonious and elegant. What surprised Ves quite a bit was how deceptively silent Tusa moved. It was as if he surrounded himself with a blanket of shadow that muffled all of his sounds and other exertions. Venerable Tusa even managed to minimize his spiritual and willpower fluctuations by applying a special technique. This was probably one of the most valuable components of the shadow dance. As a method that was partially developed for assassination, it was of crucial importance that the practitioner set off the least alarms possible while pulling off these moves. If Venerable Tusa ever fought in this fashion behind other people's backs, then the chance was great that no one would be the wiser. This is truly a fighting style that excels at assassinations and silent takedowns. Ves even guessed that if Tusa truly channeled the power of shadow while utilizing this new fighting style, he might even be able to sneak up on expert pilots in certain conditions. Even if Tusa discarded everything else that the enlightenment fruit imparted to him, it was already worth it to retain this special dampening technique. As time went by, Venerable Tusa began to experience a few difficulties. The enlightenment fruit might have given him the knowledge as well as the shadow energy needed to execute the shadow dance, but his lack of experience combined with his lack of physical training meant that his body could not keep up with his intentions. He started to fumble when he wanted to perform the most intricate jumps and dances. It became so bad that he decided that this was enough for the time being. "So what do you think of your new gift?" Ves asked as he approached the winded expert pilot. "It's something else," Tusa said between breaths. "It's a method of assassination, but it's a lot more blatant than that. It looks like it should make a lot of noise, but it is remarkably silent. Whoever invented this style clearly hasn't adapted it to Mech combat at all, but I think I can make it work after making a lot of adjustments. The downside to fighting like this is that it is too exhausting. I also need to be able to develop a deeper understanding of shadow to pull off the most outrageous moves." Ves also noted how much exertion it took to dance and fight like this. Translated to Mech combat, That meant that the Dark Zephyr wouldn't be able to keep this up for long when locked into a duel against a powerful opponent. This was quite bad, because the Dark Zephyr's energy management was already strained at this state. While Vess had made sure to equip the Dark Zephyr with much better energy cells that possessed much higher capacities, they were sorely needed as the stiletto drive expended a lot of power when it was being used. The greater the warping effect, the more energy the stiletto drive demanded. Nothing came for free. Even if the stiletto drive integrated a generous amount of face water, the entire module still needed to be powered by a lot of juice in order to keep working. This meant that the staying power of the Dark Zephyr actually hadn't improved all of that much compared to its previous version. If Tusa ever got the idea of starting to fight with the Shadow Dance style, then the energy reserves of the Dark Zephyr would drain even faster. Utilize your new fighting skills carefully, Vess advised Tusa. As much as I would like to upgrade your Dark Zephyr's energy capacity, I have already done the best I can for the time being. It is very difficult for me to give you more operating time because the internal volume of your light mech is already so small. The only way I can give you significantly more energy capacity is to pull out the emergency shield generator and put extra energy cells in its place. This will mean that your mech, and especially your stiletto drive, will become a lot more vulnerable to incoming damage. You think it's not worth it then, Tusa concluded. I think the current configuration is enough for short but intensive operations. Just keep an eye on your energy expenditure and make sure to reserve enough of a buffer to return to the fleet for resupply. Tusa did not like the sound of this, but there wasn't any way to solve this unless the Larkinson clan was able to put much better energy cells into his expert mech. Though Vess admittedly had access to ones that possessed even higher capacities, it would exceed the already generous budget that he had set for the Dark Zephyr. The Cross clan may have been willing to pull out all of the stops to turn the Mars into a quasi-ace mech at the start, but Vess was not as willing to do the same for just one of the many expert mechs under his command. Vess turned his attention to a more important topic. How will you proceed now that you have learned a powerful and extraordinary fighting style? Will you turn it into your main style and adapt it to your characteristics, or will you break it up and use it to enrich your current combat approach? This was an important question, and one that would have a lot of implications for Tusa's future development. The pilot had to pause and think about it for a dozen or so seconds. I think I will switch over to this new style and take it as the base of my new fighting approach, he eventually said. While it has its flaws and shortcomings, it is just too powerful. I am a lot more confident in my ability to keep up in a duel against Venerable DC if I am truly able to integrate the new techniques into my combat routine. That said, you're right that I should also change it up so that it better reflects my needs. There are movements and other parts about the Shadow Dance that need to be heavily modified in order to make it work for the Dark Zephyr. Well, you can do what you want. It's your choice, Tusa. All I want is to see you becoming stronger so that you will be able to save more lives in battle. How well are you able to pass on the new fighting techniques to other mech pilots? Tusa furrowed his brows. That is difficult to say. This is not exactly a style for novices. Not every light mech is suitable to pull off the moves. I can say that the ferocious piranha will probably struggle with the more dance-like moves. The mech pilots also need to be proficient in a lot of skills before they can even get started. That didn't sound too good, but Vess already came up with an idea that should make it easier. What if I design a stealthy light mech that is designed to pull off these moves to the greatest extent possible? Vess proposed. That sounds like it will help a lot, Tusa responded. It will reduce the difficulty of adopting the Shadow Dance style if the light mech is already set up to perform these techniques. You should pay close attention to the range of movement of the limbs and the ability to smoothly shift the direction of momentum. The new style also works a lot differently in space, where the mech can't rely on the force exerted by its feet to spin around and such. I will probably have to work together with you in order to make sure you got everything right. I'll give you a summons as soon as we commence the next design round then. I would like you to write down as much information and theory that you have obtained and pass on what you have learned to our other soldiers. The fruit I've given to you is the only one of its kind, you see. It would be a waste to keep all of the benefits to yourself. Tusa was not a selfish expert pilot, so he easily agreed to this additional demand, even though it added another burden on his shoulders. I will call up the current and former members of the Speed Demons to see which ones can take after this new style. If anyone is suitable to pull off the shadow dance, it will be among the premier light mech specialists in the Larkinson army. Vess smiled. I will be expecting much from you in the upcoming Trailblazer expedition. My clan and I have invested a lot of resources into you and your Dark Zephyr, even though it was not necessary for us to do so. We did so because we believe in your ability to turn battles around and deal with difficult situations that other expert pilots cannot resolve. The trend in the mech industry has definitely shifted towards ranged mechs as of late, but I am still of the opinion that there is an indispensable place for melee mechs on the modern battlefield. I won't let down your expectations, Vess. I truly appreciate everything you have done for me. I will definitely show that you are not wrong in doing so much for me. Just wait until we get into a pinch again. My Dark Zephyr and I will show you that even the smallest expert mechs can turn the largest battle around. That's the spirit. Once Vess finished his dealings with Venerable Tusa, he dismissed the expert pilot and quickly went through his next appointments. He called in Venerable Isabel Coton, next in order to gift her the Alfrey Core Detonation, code Manual Fruit. Just like Tusa, Isabel became so impressed by the detonation code that she was willing to work with it. The difference was that she was more inclined to treat it as an auxiliary method rather than the new foundation of her fighting style. Isabel's primary means of dealing damage had always been to rely on spreading flames to engulf enemies in torment. Her domain was already based on burning, and it made little sense to switch to a substantially different fighting approach that was not as aligned to her specialization. Even so, learning how she could shape her energy attacks to unleash powerful explosions was definitely helpful in fighting against expert mechs and other difficult opponents. I will try my best to write down the details of the detonation code, but I don't think I can teach others to apply the same principles. Venerable Isabel said, "It's really complicated. If not for the fruit, I don't think I would have been able to make sense of it. Even if I explain everything, it takes a special mech pilot to be able to apply it in battle. I think that certain expert pilots such as Venerable Stark and Venerable Joshua might be able to learn a thing or two about the detonation code, but it might take months if not years to see a difference. Just do your best, Isabel. The detonation code is way too precious for you to keep for yourself." Vess quickly handled the remaining fruits after he upgraded 2 of his expert pilots. He handed over the weird Old Hori Sacred Cleansing Ritual Manual fruit to Lufa in the hopes that his design spirit was able to strengthen his specialty. He wasn't certain on how to handle Imperial Thornix Salamander breeding manual fruit, though. The 2 most prominent names on his list was Director Rania Wadden of the Larkinson Biotech Institute and Director Pesca Aduk of the Tea Institute. The former was much more involved in biotechnology, which also included the rearing of mutated beasts. However, her personal specialty lay in researching and designing plant life. Her expertise in exobests wasn't all that great. The latter also possessed a biotechnology background, but became increasingly more proficient in spiritual engineering. Pesca Aduk also possessed a lot more knowledge about exobests, though she had mostly worked in the context of ecology. Neither of them were perfect candidates for him, but if he had to make a choice, he would have to lean towards Director Rania. She's a Larkinson, and she's also family in a way. Though Rania used to be a member of the Wadden dynasty, she had fully assimilated into the Larkinson clan. She also had kids with Tusa, which cemented her place among the Larkinsons. Vess called the director over and gave her a thorough explanation before feeding her the fruit. "What do you think?" he asked after Rania absorbed all of the new and specialized knowledge. "Everything makes a lot more sense now," she said. "I have learned more about Kai and what this mysterious energy can do than I have in the years I've served in your clan. I understand a lot more about mutated beasts, and I think I can do a much better job at breeding them and nurturing them into stronger specimens. You can do that, even if you don't have a talent in this aspect." Rania grinned. "Your suspicion that the manual possesses a lot of general knowledge is correct. Even though I don't have any Imperial Thornix salambers to work with, much of the theory is general enough that I can apply to any exobast. I can even apply some of what I learned on exoplants. So can I expect better results from the LBI after today?" Rania's expression lowered a bit. "It will take time for me to adapt what I have learned to our current situation. It doesn't help that I don't have talent in this area." As the Larkinson clan started up the Tea Institute and became more involved in spiritual research, Director Rania found that it was becoming increasingly more important to keep up with these developments. Unfortunately for her, Rania did not possess spiritual potential and was therefore incapable of getting started in this field. Though the Tea Institute had already conducted several research projects on how to remedy this shortcoming, for now the results were either lacking or too risky to attempt on a key member of the clan. As such, Vess was unable to help Rania get started because her spirituality was too small and weak for him to implant her with a companion spirit. Theoretically, it should be possible for him to implant her with a smaller and less intrusive companion spirit seed, but she was not as young and malleable as an unborn fetus. Trying to change her spirituality to a large degree when she was already a grown adult was a recipe for disaster. Vess still remembered the awful outcome of a relevant experiment at the Tea Institute. When Vess attempted to implant a companion spirit seed into the tiny spirituality of a talentless Paclatin test subject, the cleaner bots had to do a lot of work to clean up the operating theater. "We're still working on the issue," Vess told her. "Talent should never be a hindrance for people to pursue their dreams. Everyone should have a way to achieve success in any field they prefer. I strongly believe in this, or else I wouldn't have worked so much on projects that have succeeded in leveling the playing field. With the help of specialized knowledge that you have just obtained, I hope we can find a way for you to overcome your current limitations." His words caused Rania's eyes to light up. "You've just given me an interesting idea, Vess. We exobiologists usually work on animals, but who says we can't use the same methods on humans? This Imperial Thornix salamander breeding manual of yours is all about stimulating the potential of a specific kind of powerful lizard species, but maybe I can find a way to adapt some of its universal methods onto humans." "Really? How high are your chances of success?" "Not high, but I think this is truly worth the attempt. Let me go back to my lab so that I can organize what I have learned and formulate a plan. I will probably need to work together with the Tea Institute to conduct an experiment." Vess was glad to see Rania becoming excited about this new research project. Even if it didn't yield any positive results in the end, they would at least be able to learn a lot throughout the process. They exchanged a lot of ideas before Rania finally departed in order to get started straight away. This left Vess with no more fruits to hand out. He had used and gifted so many of them that he felt remorseful that he had run out of them so quickly. It took quite a bit of effort for him to readjust his mood. "I have lived many years without relying on these advantages. I can't let it all go through my head and become addicted to these power-ups." Vess and his clan would still have been fine if the system did not wake up during this period. The Enlightenment fruits were all icing on the cake as far as he was concerned. All of the work that he and his fellow Larkinsons had done in the last decade had built up a clan that was powerful enough to compete with the big boys. Vess was most proud of being able to effect major changes in society by virtue of his innovations and daring decisions, rather than relying on the handouts from the system. That did not mean that Vess would stop making use of enlightenment fruits and other attractive goodies. He just wanted to make sure that they supplemented his existing activities as opposed to replacing them entirely. The remaining object that Vess needed to handle was the Machian tree bark that he had wasted one of his radiant lottery tickets on. To say that he was dissatisfied with this prize was an understatement. He spent a few hours in his lab in order to study and experiment on the bark. He even chiseled away tiny samples of the hard bark in order to conduct more destructive examinations and experiments on the unknown material. Vess didn't really obtain any useful results. The material was organic, extremely hard, and gave a weird feeling to people. Other than that, Vess hadn't been able to make it do anything special. He even called out Blinky in an attempt to probe its spiritual properties, only for the spiritual cat to return in defeat. Damn. With no other viable options left, Vess retrieved a totem of Gaia and requested her assistance in figuring out the Machian tree bark. Usually, the design spirit acted rather aloof and rarely responded to his inquiries. This time was an exception, though. The totem that Vess had placed in front of his work table began to glow with power as a powerful presence channeled a small part of her attention to the private laboratory. Vess Larkinson. The air vibrated with the ethereal voice of the most powerful creation that Vess had made up to this date. Bring the tree bark closer. Okay. Vess obediently did as directed. He could feel that Gaia grew more curious about the properties of the strange organic object. Her powerful senses studied it carefully for a few seconds before she had learned what she needed to know. Please transfer the tree bark the Green Dream. The Audiobook family will take IT from there. The Green Dream is not in the Davut system as far as I recall. Vess spoke. I will have to entrust the bark to a courier service in order to ship it over. Although they have grown a lot more reliable in the past couple of years, plenty of shipments still go missing from time to time. The terraforming ship was often on assignment, as stationing it in Davut meant that she wasn't earning money on behalf of the Audiobook family. Send IT anyway. Make certain to include a totem of my likeness in the same package. Okie dokie. Can I ask why you want it sent to the Green Dream? Are you trying to integrate it into your physical body? That remains to be seen. Can you keep me appraised of what you are able to learn from it and how you will eventually put it to use? Its value is probably extremely high, so this is a massive gift. I will owe you a favor. I shall reciprocate with assistance that is commensurate to your gift. That is all I wanted to hear. Thank you for giving me this commitment, Gaia. Do not bother me with irrelevant questions. I'm your creator, Gaia. Can't you give me more respect considering that I've brought you to life in the first place? Gaia had already retracted her presence from the totem. God or not, it was not easy for her to manifest in this way. It was even more strenuous for her to transmit her voice through the air. Vess just rolled her eyes. This kind of behavior was already typical for the powerful design spirit. He already figured out that much of the reason why Gaia had little patience for him was because she was still preoccupied with her ongoing evolution and transformation. With the understanding that he possessed today, Vess did not blame Gaia all that much anymore. Becoming a true god was an immense challenge to any individual, let alone a design spirit that was only 5 years old. I hope she'll remember everything that I've done to her once she has become more powerful than ever. Vess sighed. He spent a bit of time arranging the Machian tree bark to be transported to the Green Dream. Normally, he would have felt inclined to assign a couple of Larkinson ships to escort the precious cargo over to where the Audiobook family was terraforming its latest planet. But right now was a sensitive time. It won't be long before we can finally kick off the Trailblazer expedition. The Golden Skull Alliance had prepared for this massive endeavor for many years. This was plenty of time to get everything ready and prepare everything the 3 alliance partners intended to bring on this expedition. There was no case of missing essential materials or running short on supplies. If Vess wanted to, He could order the combined fleet to start off the expedition early and depart within a matter of days. Have I truly taken care of everything? What did I still miss? As Ves spent his time on preparing for the approaching start of his much-anticipated journey to the deeper parts of the new frontier, Calabast dropped by his office to inform him of a surprising development. An old friend of yours has arrived in Davut. Ves looked up from his desk with a questioning glance. I have a lot of so-called old friends. Some of them even traveled to Davut over the years in order to freeload off my clan. Which one are you talking about? The spymaster smirked as she leaned on the side of his desk. She reached out her hand to stroke Lucky's back. Meow. This friend is a little different, Ves. He's a Fridayman that you know personally. Does that narrow it down enough for you, or do you need more hints? Ves fell silent as he quickly went through a list of names. There weren't many male Fridaymen that he knew in person, and many of them had turned into his enemies. Given your words, and given how few of them I considered as my friends, I can only come up with two possible names. It's either Oleg Vorn of Tristan Wesseling. It's the latter. Oh. Ves picked up a data pad and skimmed through the intelligence that the Black Cats had gathered about the Fridayman presence on Davut. He had always been aware that the Friday Coalition might not be finished with him, but he never took the state seriously as a result. Despite winning the Komodo War, the Fridaymen lost a huge amount of strength, wealth, and manpower. They needed to allocate almost everything they had left just to take possession of the former territories of the Hexadric hegemony and integrate them into their growing state. Given all of their needs at home, how could the Fridaymen possibly transfer so many troops, resources, and qualified manpower to an entirely different dwarf galaxy? Starting a colonial adventure should never come at the cost of losing one's foundation at home. Ves bet that pretty much all of the leaders and powerful stakeholders of the Friday Coalition still resided in the Komodo Star sector. Each of these leaders came from lineages that had built up their own commercial and political empires in their home state. It was in their best self-interest to avoid compromising their existing assets just to be able to plant more flags in the Red Ocean. Ves never took the Fridayman colonies as a result. The Golden Skull Alliance had grown too strong for his old enemies to attempt another raid like the one that resulted in the Battle of Reckoning. He expected the Friday Coalition to mind its business and stay in its own lanes, while Ves went on with his business like normal. To be honest, he couldn't care less about the hostile state. While there were still harsh feelings between the two, the heat of the moment had already passed after the Komodo War had passed. Years had passed since the Hex army launched millions of Valkyrie Mechs and other living Mechs at the Mech armies of the Coalition partners. Back then, there was a real rationale for taking out Ves, as his removal would directly reduce the losses suffered by the Fridayman Mech forces. Now that this was no longer the case, the Fridaymen shouldn't be so eager to invest so much resources into neutralizing him. They had much better things to do with their depleted forces. Though Ves and the Friday Coalition still had some remaining entanglements, they shouldn't be enough for either side to continue to obsess over each other. He never expected the Fridaymen to take the initiative to contact him, though. Not this soon and not through an unexpected spokesperson like Tristan. Why him? Why did he come here? Shouldn't he be building up his career all the way in the old galaxy? Ves still possessed a decent impression of Tristan. As one of the direct disciples of Master Meredith Katzenberg, he had access to a lot more wealth and opportunities than almost every other Mech designer. Such a Mech designer did not need to build a Mech company from scratch, nor go through desperate measures in order to carve a place in the Mech industry. He just needed to follow the arrangements of his master or use her network to gain a head start in his own career. A soft Mech designer like Tristan Wesseling did not belong in a harsh and wild environment like the Red Ocean. The new frontier was a turbulent place for Mech designers. Plenty of them who did not possess opportunities at home had risen up from nowhere, But even more of them were beaten down by the overwhelming competition from the dominant market players. Rather than trying so hard to achieve success in one of the most competitive Mech markets in human space, Tristan would have a much better time if he competed in a market he was familiar with and could take maximum advantage of his existing connections. However, according to the intelligence report, it did not seem that Tristan had traveled to the Red Ocean in order to start his own business or lay the groundwork for Master Katzenberg to extend her tentacles to the new frontier. The Friday Coalition has turned Tristan into an envoy, Calabast succinctly explained. The goal is to secure an opportunity to bring you to the negotiating table in person in order to hold a deep and serious discussion with you. Previously, the Friday men had dispatched their diplomats to us, but Minister Shedderin never let them go any further. I imagine that's for good reason. Shedderin would have notified me if there was any use to talking with the Friday men. Is this why they decided to send Tristan this time? The director of intelligence grinned as she squished Lucky's face. The cat luxuriated in the pampering that he received. Correct. In truth, the situation of the Friday men has changed over the years. As their position has worsened, they have become more desperate to negotiate with us. Sending Tristan is a sign that they are willing to be sincere about concluding a deal that satisfies both sides. Oh, tell me what's going on. Anything that makes the Friday men feel uneasy should be advantageous to us. Vess leaned forward in anticipation of hearing a good story. Calabast did not disappoint on this front. The Black Cats had gathered a heap of intelligence. Combined with the analysis conducted by the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, the Larkinson clan possessed a pretty clear picture of how the Friday Coalition was doing these days. The spymaster quickly went over the aftermath of the Komodo War, the increasing tensions between the winners and losers among the coalition partners, and the increasing importance of securing colonies in the Red Ocean. The rise of facewater technology most acutely affected the new frontier, but also had massive implications for the old galaxy. Every state and established power that was rooted in the Milky Way needed to establish a colony in the Red Ocean in order to gain an internal channel for facewater. If a state like the Friday Coalition was unable to found and keep their colonies in the new frontier, then it would not only have access to less facewater than other rivals, but also be forced to buy it from alternate channels at a hefty premium. It would not surprise anyone at all that states, without their own supply of facewater, would have to pay triple the amount of money to obtain this valuable substance. This was a massive expense, and one that could seriously affect the balance of power in many star sectors and star clusters. Now that Vess thought about it, the colonization fever had picked up as of late. A lot more pioneers had poured into the Red Ocean, despite the price of passage remaining as high as ever. Building up a presence in the Red Ocean was no longer seen as a luxury. It had become a matter of survival. Given the increased importance of maintaining a solid presence in the Red Ocean, it made a lot more sense why the Friday men wanted to hold a serious talk with Vess. This was especially the case considering the vengeful Hexer exiles could not let go of the fact that they lost the Komodo War. His wife may have told him stories about the Hexers stirring up trouble against their Fridayman rivals in the Magyar Middle Zone, but he never expected that it had reached this level. "They're still going on about this?" Vess puzzlingly asked. "Yes," Calabast stated. "Many of the dynasties that previously reigned over the hegemony have successfully managed to transplant the essence of their forces and liquid assets to their new holdings in the Magyar Middle Zone. They currently possess a significant force advantage over their old enemies and have not been shy about exploiting this disparity. Why don't the Hexers roll over the Friday men colonies entirely if this is the case? I can imagine that those angry women are more than eager to exact their pound of flesh." "They can't, Vess. The Magyar Middle Zone is bigger than the Friday men and Hexers. There are many other pioneers that have founded their own colonies in the same region. Each of them have formed their own power blocks that each put the other in check. The reality of the situation is that every colony must constantly be protected by a sizable garrison in order to deter opportunists from launching raids. I see. The Hexers probably would have loved to do nothing more than to kick the Friday men out of the Red Ocean, but they could not afford to deploy the majority of their Mech forces away from their own holdings. Many of the powerful dynasties essentially had nothing left now that they had fled to the new frontier. The colonies that they had founded a few years ago represented the last bastion of these dynasties. There was no escape route left after they had sacrificed so much already. This led to the current impasse. The Hexer raiders might not be strong enough to topple the Friday colonies outright, but they still made the lives of their old enemies hell by harassing the weaker and more vulnerable settlements. However, it just so happened that the weaker Fridayman colonies happened to belong to the less well-off coalition partners. While a number of the colonies founded by the Carnegie Group, the Vermeer Group, the Vanguard Group, and the Puffer clan all suffered serious losses and setbacks, the stronger ones founded by the Gage dynasty and the Kansu clan were mostly spared from harassment. Vess began to comprehend the nuances behind the latest development. Not every Fridayman is eager to negotiate a cessation of hostilities. Is that what you're saying? Correct. Nominally, the Friday Coalition wishes to stem the losses by negotiating with you, Calabast said after clarifying the context behind the new development. In reality, only a part of the coalition wants to form a resolution of the problem. The other part is not in a hurry to stop the Hexer raids. The more the current situation proceeds, the more the balance of power will tilt towards the most dominant members of the state. Vess cynically chuckled. I knew these backstabbers wouldn't be able to remain united. Those Gaugers have always been too full of themselves. Why the hell should we intervene in the first place? Let them fight and suffer. He was not particularly sad to hear that the Friday Coalition was starting to show its fault lines. A sense of schadenfreude overtook his mood. He derived a lot of pleasure from imagining how the Friday Coalition might fall apart one day. The Friday Coalition isn't made up of stupid people, Vess, Calabast cautioned him. It is impossible for the Friday men to let external parties take advantage of their infighting. The coalition is unlikely to break up completely, but it is a realistic possibility that the Gage dynasty and the Kansu clan will become a lot more dominant than before. From our analysis, we believe that as long as the weaker coalition partners are willing to make concessions to the Gaugers and the Kansus, the latter two will do more to protect the outlying colonies that are under pressure. Vess frowned. This situation sounded increasingly more complicated. So the primary conflict is not between the Friday men or the Hexers, but between these dummies themselves. The Hexers and myself are simply external factors that the Friday men wish to leverage in order to manipulate their domestic political landscape. The overarching message that Calabast wanted to convey was that everything revolved around interests. The Gaugers and the other coalition partners were solely trying to secure their own advantages without letting their feelings and sentiments interfere with their calculus. Tristan's surprise arrival in Davut had nothing to do with trying to reconcile a strained relationship. The Friday men who supported the negotiation effort just wanted to hold an exchange of interests. The Gaugers and the Kansus might not be so eager to forge a new deal with you, but the remaining ones are much more desperate to enact changes, Calabast noted. You should expect them to offer a considerable amount of concessions to you in order to obtain your agreement. This alone makes it worthwhile to listen to their proposals. I don't know, Calabast. The Trailblazer expedition is due to start. I don't need any further distractions in my life. More importantly, I'm pretty sure that my wife will vehemently oppose any deal I make with the Friday men. He could already imagine his wife screaming in his face. In the end, Vess grew too curious at what Tristan and the Friday men had to say. He agreed to the suggestion of meeting the Fridayman envoy in person. Even if Vess held no interest in reconciling with the Friday men, he still wanted to get in touch with Tristan again and learn how the man was doing these days. Perhaps it might not have been appropriate for Vess to regain contact with Tristan while the Komodo War had entered its hottest period, but that was already in the past. Seeing as certain elements of the Friday Coalition no longer treated the Hexers as strictly enemies, it should be okay for Vess to renew his personal friendship with Tristan. It did not take long for the diplomats from both sides to hammer out the details. Since the Larkinsons held the dominant position in this negotiation, it was up to them to decide the meeting venue and circumstances. "Let's invite him over to the cat nest, Benny," Vess decided. "I think it would be best if we meet him at a site where we are able to exert maximum control." "Which structure or area of the cat nest do you prefer to sit down with Tristan?" Gavin Newman asked. "The exact site will have a large influence on the atmosphere and setting of the upcoming talks." Let's go with the fanciest option. We need to impress the Friday men, after all. Schedule an appointment at one of those fancy ceremonial meeting rooms on the upper levels of the Ascension Gallery. Tristan will definitely gain a deeper impression of our power once he tours the different wings underneath. Good choice. We will schedule the appointment as soon as possible. The Fridayman diplomats had no objections to this choice. It was not as if they could change anything anyway. They were already happy that Vess finally deigned to speak with them in person. On the fated day, Vess had dressed up in one of his more ceremonial outfits. Though he wanted to meet with Tristan as a fellow Mech designer, the stakes were too high for him to take this meeting too lightly. By putting up a costume that was not only bedecked with symbolic icons, but also increased his stature by adding a rich maroon cape, Vess automatically assumed a different attitude and demeanor. Lucky also received a bit of care and attention. A special bot hovered over his metallic form to clean and polish his exterior plating to a shine. Meow. Minister Sheddarin Purness, who had dressed himself up in a more muted brown business suit, was also present at this time. He had already spent an hour coaching Vess on how to approach the coming meeting. "It is up to you to decide how to approach your first formal talk with the Friday Coalition, but I suggest you put your personal whims and feelings aside, at least for this session. You are not only representing yourself, but also a clan that encompasses over 500,000 members, many of which are highly skilled and highly educated. Each of them have entrusted their lives and their futures to you. Don't betray their trust by fooling around and conceding more than is necessary. In fact, it is best not to make any agreements in the first meeting. You should always come back to us in order to hold rational discussions on how we should best proceed. Decisions taken at the heat of the moment rarely work out well." "I understand," Vess said as he examined his dashing and heroic appearance in front of a mirror projection. "I will be speaking with Tristan alone, right?" "Yes, representatives from both sides will be listening in, but we will all be staying in another room. We will always be able to provide clarification or answers should you ask." "Good, let's get this going." Vess moved to the ceremonial meeting room that the clan had prepared for this occasion. Totems of the golden cat along with other custom decorations significantly elevated the rich decor. Dramatized paintings of the glorious battles that the Larkinson clan had fought, and one along with the pristine banners of every Mech legion, gave the room a martial vibe. Everything in this ceremonial chamber was designed to project the strength of the Larkinson clan. The implicit message was anything but subtle. The time where the Larkinsons had to cower and run away from the Fridaymen had passed. This time, it was the visitors who had to grovel in front of the host. While Lucky jumped onto a table and settled in a comfortable position, Vess approached the wide and ornate windows and looked out over the expansive campus of the cat nest. The large and expansive compound, situated in Industrial District 2, had been his home for the past 5 years. He gazed at the Blue Cat estates, where many of the clansmen resided. The idyllic houses and apartments had charmed so many Larkinsons that many of them had applied to transfer to the Davute branch in order to make this part of their lives permanent. The massive Hammerworks manufacturing complex dominated much of the space of the cat nest. The amount of industrial activity that took place within its productive halls had ramped up so much after successive investments that over 2,000 Mech rolled out of the production lines each standard day. The Genesis lab, where the entire design department had worked at for 5 years, also turned into a formidable institution. Hiring over 1,000 Mech designers and a bunch of other specialists had turned it into a mecca of Mech design in this neighborhood. Aside from these prominent structures, the surface of the cat nest was also prized by many Larkinsons and visitors. The green parks and plazas not only granted people an opportunity to relax and enjoy the pleasant sights, but also granted them the opportunity to interact and play with all of the cats that made the place their home. The abundance of cats and other pets that resided or regularly dropped by had turned the cat nest into such an eccentric sight that it had practically become a tourist attraction of Davute. How fun! He would be lying if he said that he hated his time here. Davute had done wonders to give him and his clan the rest and stability that they craved. The rigors and dangers of space travel could wear away the sanity of any human. Perhaps Vess truly needed this vital period of rest and recuperation. He noticed that he had become a lot less restless and prone to making extreme decisions as of late. This can't go on much longer, he whispered to himself. Returning to sanity and normality might be great if he wanted to live a normal life, but that was not his goal. He wanted to become a star designer and reach the pinnacle of Mech design. It was impossible for him to work his way up this height without exposing himself to a sense of urgency and pressure. Vess increasingly missed all of the stimulation he received back when he was still journeying from one dangerous place to another. The Trailblazer expedition was primarily meant to ignite his drive again so that he could design much more brilliant Mechs in the coming years. A chime sounded in the room. Vess turned around just as the double doors automatically slid open. 2 guests had arrived at the upper levels of the Ascension Gallery. The smartly dressed woman that accompanied Tristan up to this point had carefully schooled her emotions and body language, but the same could not be said for the man of the hour. Vess knew that the little ploy to give Tristan a brief tour through the cat nest and the Ascension Gallery had succeeded. Hardly anyone could remain calm after touring all of the impressive display Mechs and large depictions of every design spirit. The power and accomplishments of the Larkinson clan exceeded that of many organizations that had arrived in the Red Ocean in the past few years. Though Tristan had already read and heard a lot about the rapid growth of the Larkinsons, the impact was much greater if he became exposed to the splendor up close. However, Tristan was not a dummy who could be fooled so easily. He not only received expert instruction, but also possessed the maturity and life experience to recognize the game that was being played. Journeymen were clever and observant people, as a rule. Tristan may have been affected by the earlier displays, but he did not want to let down the people who invested him with responsibility. The Fridayman took a deep breath and steadily strode forward. Just like Vess, Tristan dressed up by wearing a ceremonial dress uniform. While his outfit was not as opulent as that of a clan leader, he looked handsome as his neatly combed blonde hair paired well with his white ensemble. The double doors closed, giving the 2 men the illusion of privacy. "Welcome to the Larkinson clan, Mr. Wesseling." Vess greeted his visitor in a slightly officious tone. "I hope that your visit to the cat nest has been pleasant." "It is definitely a unique experience, Patriarch Larkinson," Tristan mildly replied. "The Red Ocean has presented me with many new sights. It is interesting how visiting this new dwarf galaxy makes one realize how small their home states actually are. Places such as the Friday Coalition and the Garland Empire do not carry as much weight all the way over here. One of the lessons that I have learned is that everyone who has arrived in the new frontier has to start from scratch. That is both the charm and the pitfall of the Red Ocean. Many dreams have come true in this dwarf galaxy, but many more have been relentlessly crushed by the ruthlessness that dominates this region of space. Tristan swept his gaze around the ornamental room. Your clan doesn't appear to have been crushed at all. Starting anew in the Red Ocean has done you and your clan a great favor. No thanks to the Friday Coalition, Vess pointedly said. History could have proceeded a lot differently if Vess and his clan never got into conflict with the Friday men. So much death and misery has ensued after the Bright Republic abruptly turned against one of its prestigious military families due to receiving instructions from their unofficial masters. Of course, it didn't help that Vess started to hook up with a hexer, but that was besides the point. Vess was growing tired of this dance. He decided to address the reason for this meeting. My people have been telling me that you have come to me in order to convey the Friday Coalition's words. Is that correct? Tristan nodded, though he did not look particularly firm while doing so. That is correct. The central government has turned me into an envoy and has invested me with certain powers, rights, and responsibilities. The state that I am representing wants to hold a serious discussion with you and your clan. What kind of discussion? About peace. Hasn't the Komodo War ended a long time ago? The Hexadric hegemony who I have supported is gone. Tristan did not look amused. You know what I am talking about, Patriarch. The war back at our home star sector may have ended, but the war that is boiling in the Magyar Middle Zone has continued to intensify over time. Friday men and hexers are still fighting against each other in a time where it makes little sense to pursue old grievances. We may have driven the hexers out of the Komodo star sector, but don't forget it is ultimately them that have started the entire conflict in the first place. We were never the aggressors. We have always maintained a defensive posture and only attacked when we were compelled to retaliate. Even you should be able to acknowledge that we have always been saner than the hexers. Vess snorted. I am not interested in the rights and wrongs of the long-standing rivalry between the two sides. From my perspective, you Friday men have screwed me over time and time again, while the hexers have always supported me. Nothing you say can change that. Given that your state has tried to wipe me and my clansmen out, I don't feel like being generous to you. Don't think that the fact that quite a few years have passed since then will make me look at the Friday Coalition with rose-tinted glasses. I still take pleasure in imagining the demise of your state. What could Tristan say to that? While the Friday Coalition had managed to achieve real progress by getting to meet with Vess in person, his harsh tone made it a lot more difficult to achieve reconciliation between the two sides.